Well, to discuss what's going on in London, I'm joined in the studio by former Conservative Health Minister and Wimbledon MP Stephen Hammond, and for the Liberal Democrats by the party's Health and Social Care spokesperson, the Twickenham MP Munira Wilson. Joining our discussion is the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, Rushanara Ali. Welcome all of you. Stephen, first of all, who's your preference to go at the top of the next priority list?
I think the key thing is the government has set out the priority groups. I think it's key to get through the first four by the middle of February, and that clearly looks like that's going to happen. I think, as Matt Hancock has said, it might be sensible actually to think about having a discussion at that stage whether the next group of priorities are the right priorities. We've heard the case from a number of people on your VT about who should be next. I suspect that a lot of people will be saying we want to reopen schools. You've just had a VT from Rob Halfon, look at teachers, and clearly I think the police are really in the front line. So the sensible time to have a discussion about whether the priority groups are right is now, because come the middle of February, we will have done the first four priority groups.
Munira, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, can't get a jab and he's having to self-isolate. Should politicians be in the queue?
Absolutely not, unless they are in one of those vulnerable groups. I don't see why I, as a 42-year-old fit and healthy person, should be anywhere close to top of the queue. I would like to see teachers being prioritised after the most vulnerable and after our health and care workers, because I think it is absolutely critical that we get schools fully reopen as quickly and as safely as possible. And part of that is making sure that teachers are and school staff are protected.
Rushanara, we heard today from the NHS that fewer than 500,000 Londoners have so far had the inoculation, first and second doses. Are you as confident as Stephen that the government will hit its target?
Well, look, I very much hope the government does hit its target, because we all need this vaccination programme to be implemented as quickly as possible. Where in constituencies like mine, day in, day out, people are dying. Royal London Hospital is at breaking point, and we need to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible. First of all, on the here and now, which still needs to be sorted out, the supply is still irregular. In boroughs like mine, some weeks we've got vaccinations, other weeks we haven't. That's not good enough. That needs to change. The second thing is that there are a lot of people who haven't received the vaccinations, who are very vulnerable, and the take-up among some groups are much lower. We're doing really well with white men and women, but BAME groups, the take-up is much lower. We need better data. And in terms of the point made about who should come next, the priority groups after that, we've got to make sure, as others have said, that we get the key workers who are most exposed to catching this virus, we get to them first, and that our economy and our society is opened up as quickly as possible so that the economy doesn't contract the way it has done in the last three lockdowns.
Stephen, have you any idea what's going wrong with the supply of doses? I mean, the Mayor seems to think that the government got the distribution formula wrong.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, the Mayor has been late all the way through, but we won't discuss his failings tonight. I think the reality is that the distribution networks are now there. I think that, as the Health Secretary has acknowledged, there have been some problems with supply. You've seen something from Pfizer today, but might mean there might be a little bit more shortage over the next few weeks. But none that what I am
that's
hearing...
quite worrying, isn't it? Any shortage.
Of course it's worrying. Actually, what they're doing is slightly reordering their manufacturing, as I understand it, to deliver more in the future. The key thing, I mean, I spoke, as I'm sure Munira and Rushanara have done, with local people, the local CCG today to check. And the numbers rolling through now are rolling through on quite an impressive basis. We heard this morning on a London call that we expect to have all the care home staff vaccinated by Sunday. And I hear that NHS staff are being vaccinated. Locally, one of my hospitals is now doing that 7 days a week for the NHS staff. So London has been a bit slower, and it is true, partly because of demographics, we haven't done as well as some of the other regions. But what is also true is the distribution networks are there. It is stepping up, and the supply is coming through.
What's your experience in Twickenham? Actually, you've got some experience of working in the pharmaceutical industry before you came into politics.
Yes, so from what I'm hearing on the ground in Twickenham, they are getting supply, and we have moved from the over 80s into the under 80s, but I am concerned to see the London-wide figures, why we're lagging behind. I mean, what we really need is a lot more detailed data to show comparatively, if we've got fewer over 80s, as I think Stephen has suggested, that proportionately that we're in line with other parts of the country. We've also got to focus on some of the vaccine hesitancy amongst BAME communities, as Rushanara has pointed to, because we do have large numbers of BAME people living in the city, and there's got to be a strong public health information campaign, peer-to-peer encouragement, working and engaging with the faith communities. And I know there are faith communities coming forward, offering their volunteers who can speak multiple languages to try and help engage and get over that vaccine hesitancy.
Stephen, we've heard a lot about a roadmap out of lockdown. We also heard today that more than half of patients in London hospitals have COVID. What do you think the route out of it should be? I mean, how soon should we start thinking about easing restrictions?
Well, I think that's extremely difficult for us sitting here. So what we should be looking at is what are the targets we're getting in each group to get their vaccination done, so that will mean hospitalisations decreasing. What are we looking for in terms of hospitalisations falling? What are we looking at in terms of transmission rates falling? When is it safe to say, from evidence from the first lockdown and internationally, if transmission rates are at a certain level, it's safer to do some of those things?
But you must be worried about the economy.
Well, of course I'm worried about the economy, but equally the two things between having a healthy population and an economy open are not divorced. They're not mutually exclusive. The key, I think, here is to make sure that next time round, as we come out of the lockdown, that actually we see it on a long-term and sustainable basis. We don't want to keep allowing the virus to be suppressed by doing the actions we've done and getting it down, and then allowing it to go up again. And the key thing now is to make sure that when we come out of this lockdown, that vaccinations are being throughout the whole population as fast as possible, and that we can reopen on a stage basis, on a sustainable basis as well.
Rushanara, in your constituency, of course, is Brick Lane famous for its restaurants. I mean, there must be an awful lot of anguish there among the businesses about what's going on.
Well, look, the concern is about making sure that we open the economy up in a sustainable way. And what businesses can see is that lives have been lost because of the confused messaging and responses last year. You know, introducing lockdown too late and then opening up and then giving people very mixed messages. We need to learn from the bad decisions that were made in part last year. But one thing I would just say is, so people want the economy opened up in a safe, sustainable, careful way while lives are protected, because my constituency has been hit very hard by death rates in the first wave, and as I say, day in, day out, we're dealing with deaths, and in the last 24 hours my caseload has involved a number of deaths and supporting families. So one thing I would say about what we do once we get those who are most at risk vaccinated is that Matt Hancock's called for a debate. That's important, but it's very important that the evidence is followed and that the government doesn't politicize who gets vaccinated in the next wave, so that the people who need it, the people we depend on, who are most at risk, are protected first. And that's very important, because I think a great deal of trust has broken down over the last year. The response of the National Health Service has been phenomenal, and the vaccination programme, those who are doing it, has been phenomenal. We need to maintain that trust and build on it.
Stephen, you've heard what Rushanara said.
I'll just say what Rushanara said. I mean, surely the key point of the government is not politicising it. What the government is doing is setting out the priority groups based on the most vulnerable. That's why it is the over 80s. It is why the children are extremely vulnerable. It is why NHS and care staff are being done. It is why we're going down through a tier. What I was suggesting a few moments ago is that as we go through that tier, as we now look at those who we want to prioritise next, you know, when is the right time to have at least a discussion so that the government makes a decision which buys into that consent that Rushanara was talking about?
I'm simply saying it needs to be evidence-based.
Thank you, Rushanara. Munira.
My concern is the government's banking everything on the vaccination strategy, and the vaccination strategy is absolutely critical and important to protect us. But as yet, we don't know if the vaccine stops transmission of the virus.
And you're worried about the one dose only, aren't you?
But potentially, there's some mixed data around whether we should be delaying the second dose to 12 weeks. But my concern is, alongside vaccination, we need to be breaking the chains of transmission. And that means encouraging more people to self-isolate through financial support, practical support. It might mean offering up the hotel rooms for those who are in overcrowded accommodation who can't self-isolate isolate at home. If you don't do that, then the rates will just go back up again and we'll end up back cycling through these restrictions. We can't just bank on the vaccination strategy.
Can I ask all of you, assuming we're still in some form of lockdown coming up to Easter and possibly into the tier system after that, should the mayoral election on May the 6th go ahead?
It's very difficult because I think Londoners will rightly want to hold this mayor to account and rightly want to have their say, and there are a number of important things happening that he's putting in place that other people might want to have the chance to stop. So I think that it will be difficult, but I think we should, in the interest of democracy, having delayed it a year, aim to go for May the 6th as much as possible.
But it's going to be very hard to campaign, isn't it? Knocking on doors, meetings.
Absolutely, it does make campaigning difficult, but I think we do risk a real democracy deficit, having already delayed by a year, if we continue to delay. But it needs to be safe, so we need to wait for the experts to advise.
Rushanara, how much is this election going to be a referendum on how the mayor has handled coronavirus?
Well, look, I think, first of all, on the elections, I think unless we reform the way we vote and to ensure it's COVID safe, it's going to be a challenge. And the government needs to look at how elections be conducted virtually or through electronic voting. It's a long-term debate, but it needs to come of age. And the second thing is, I think the situation for city mayors has been very difficult up and down the country, as we've seen with Andy Burnham and his battles with the government. The government has made some decisions and dumped some of the changes, including funding, on the London mayor. And that is very bad behaviour in terms of insisting that the mayor of London makes cuts when the national government won't pass on the budget support that's needed. So some of that needs to stop. And the public can see through quite a lot of that, actually, when the government...
Can I just ask Munira, this election could also be a referendum on how the government has handled it, couldn't it?
Well, absolutely it could, and I think the people of London will want to make their voice heard on that.
Well, I'd like to say we talk about this at great length for much longer, but I'm afraid, as usual, we've run out of time. I'd like to say thank you very much to all my guests for joining us tonight. Thanks to Robert, to Stephen, Munira, Rushanara. I'll be back next month with another edition of The Late Debate. Until then, good night, and thank you for watching.